And welcome into this WJZ CBS News Baltimore special. You know what it is tonight. It is a party at Camden Yards because the O's clinched the division for the first time since 2014. Rick Ritter, Mark Viviano in studio. For a guy that's been covering the O's for quite some time, talk to me just about this accomplishment because it is certainly unique to say the least.
It's beyond the Orioles, to be honest with you. I was speaking with some folks down at the ballpark today prior to the game against the Red Sox. By the way, they beat the Red Sox 2-0 to clinch the AL East title with their 100th win. This story, in rebuilding as they have, to win the American League East is one of the greatest stories I've covered and seen transpire in the 30 years that I've been covering sports in this town. I mean, it's remarkable. And I go back to spring training 2018 when Dan Duquette was still general manager of the Orioles, and he said to me in an interview, "You don't rebuild in the American League East." His point being, and there were very few who disagreed with him, there are too many good teams, too many powerhouse teams. You can't tear down a team and try to rebuild among those giants. They hired Mike Elias shortly thereafter, and he did exactly that. And what he did, how he did it, and the pain that they endured to get to this point is truly remarkable. These players that he's drafted, traded for, developed, and still have coming up through this minor league system, set the stage for success, potentially for years to come, that this could be the first of many. Now, the template of that being the Houston Astros, the organization from which Mike Elias came, 7 straight years in the playoffs for the Astros, including World's Championship. So can the Orioles do that? That's to be determined. But what they've done just to this point today, truly remarkable.
Yeah, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it's hard not to think down the line when you got a team this young, this good at this stage in their career. I'm glad that you brought up the Houston Astros because, look, you know baseball better than anybody, especially in this market. And I remember you talking about them a couple of years ago when Elias came in. But just because the Astros did it doesn't mean it's going to work for another team. How hard is it to accomplish a rebuild?
Ask the Chicago White Sox.
It's a great example.
They stumbled through theirs, and they finally fired their team president and general manager and said, it didn't work. We're going to try again. For that matter, the Philadelphia Phillies, their rebuild really never took seed. And then they just said, well, let's just start spending the money we got. And they did, and now they made it to a World Series last year. Yeah. They went 10 years without a winning record after their successful run in which they were a World's champ. So it's not easy is the point. And that then further emphasizes the degree of difficulty of doing it in the American League East, which the Orioles have done. And they've dominated in doing so this year. And it's remarkable. You talk about turning the tables. They have literally flipped the script. 5 years ago, the Boston Red Sox won the division, won the World Series, and the Orioles were 47-115.
Wow.
That's 5 years ago.
Yeah.
The rebuild then started. 5 years later, the Red Sox are in last place. The Orioles are division champs. Can the Orioles win a World Series? They can. We'll see if they do. And for the first time in the history of division play, the Boston Red Sox and New York Yankees occupy the bottom 2 places in the American League East.
How about that?
And who's at the top? The Orioles and the Tampa Bay Rays. 2 of the lowest payrolls in all of Major League Baseball. I mean, it is completely flipping over a system that many people abhor and say you can't do that. You have to have a salary cap.
Yeah.
Well, apparently not. And Andy MacPhail said it years ago when he took over. He said the Tampa Bay Rays took away the excuse because they're always good.
Kind of rewrite the rules.
With the lowest payroll.
Yeah.
Not that the Orioles have to spend to the low degree that Tampa does, but the key is draft, develop. Smart is better than rich.
Yeah.
It really is. And especially for long-term sustainability. So that's what we're looking at, and that's what Baltimore's celebrating right now. They're on that field at Camden Yards, and I'm sure the champagne tastes good.
And let's see if we can pop up Camden Yards and we can take a live look from the outside. That is where the party is. If you are just joining us, the Orioles AL East champs for the first time since 2014. Not only that, Mark, they hit 100 wins for the first time in 20-plus seasons. You and I are sitting here, we're talking about the rebuild. Okay, so you got to have the right guys in the front office. Elias, he was the right guy. You got to make the right picks.
Yeah.
But you talk about the picks and these guys being this young. No moment is too bright for this team. A unique group of guys in this clubhouse.
Yeah, and, Adley Rutschman was a national champion at Oregon State. Number 1 overall draft pick, 2019, Mike Elias' first draft pick. And he clearly came in as a guy who plays a command position that is catcher. And you could just tell from day one, he had the fiber to be that guy. That he was a can't-miss sort of leader prospect.
Kind of the centerpiece of this whole thing.
And, you go back to when they drafted Matt Wieters, and a similar feel about him, too. Wieters was a part of the renaissance of the Orioles with those playoff runs in 12, 14, and 16. But this is another level because it's not just the catcher, Adley Rutschman. It's the shortstop, Gunnar Henderson, the second baseman, Jordan Westberg.
They can beat you many different ways.
And to see that Heston Kjerstad's been called up, and this pitching staff, which Kyle Bradish is now the leader of this pitching staff. Yeah. He was acquired in a trade for Dylan Bundy from the Angels. Grayson Rodriguez, first-round draft pick. Dan Duquette,
stud.
He's certainly lived up to that. Dean Kramer was a part of the Manny Machado trade. Kyle Gibson, they did go out and spend some money for him, and he was pitching for the Phillies in the World Series last year.
Yep.
So all of these pieces have come together. And I think, too, and one of the things that can't be overlooked are those guys who were a part of the bad years, the rebuild years. Talking about Cedric Mullins, Anthony Santander, Austin Hayes, and Ryan Mountcastle, specifically those guys. They were all in the starting lineup tonight.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if they added a bunch of young guys and said, you old guys, if you want to hang on. No, they've been integral to the success that this team has continued.
Which is not easy for them to be with what they've been through to stick around.
No, it's not easy, but and kudos to Mike Elias, who, when they clinched the playoff spot, he gave credit to Dan Duquette. He said, you drafted some good players.
Yeah.
He drafted Grayson Rodriguez, Dan Duquette did, and Mike Elias has come in and restarted the whole franchise from the bottom up in terms of how they develop players, how they draft in the Dominican Republic, and how they've added analytics and a number of more scouts to what they do to build it up to the point where it could be sustainable, that they're a very good playoff contending team for a number of years. That's their goal.
One of the other headlines here over the past couple of months, really over the past year, you could say, is are the Orioles going to stay in the city of Baltimore? What's going to happen here? We got a lease extension that's coming up. We know it's been an issue. For me, so many fans have been asking constantly, do you think they're going to go? Do you think something's going to happen? Well, you know what? Forget about that stuff. It's out the window now, okay?
Yeah.
Because at the start of this game tonight, they put it on the Jumbotron. I know you were there. The city of Baltimore, the Maryland Stadium Authority, the state itself, Governor Wes Moore, Peter Angelos, they get this deal done to make it a 30-year plus to stay in the city of Baltimore for another lease at Camden Yards.
Yeah, and so it's done. And I can say, and somewhat to editorialize, it was never not going to be done.
Yeah.
I understood and appreciate the fears and the frustrations, both by those in Annapolis and those who are fans, because it was a frustrating process that didn't have to be.
Right.
This was pretty easy. What it, though, then included to draw it out and make it more frustrating was, as has been well reported, the attempt to gain an extra $600 million out of the state. And I guess you can't fault someone for asking, but you can't get it. So since you can't get it, are you going to sign this thing or not? Yeah, we're going to sign this thing. I mean, business people, push the envelope to make business decisions, but it was pretty outrageous. It wasn't going to happen. The ask wasn't going to be answered to the degree that they wanted. It wasn't. so they're going to sign the deal they got.
Yeah, the big thing is
which was going to happen all along. And good news, Oriole fans. Now we can put to rest the concerns. Right?
And focus on the postseason here. So that's what I want to kind of end with as we get ready to wrap things up. We go to the postseason now. The road for the AL runs through the city of Baltimore, runs through Camden Yards. Top seed. This is a huge deal for you. This team, I mean, I don't want to ask you, what's your prediction? What's their potential? We know what their potential is, but you got a group of young guys who, they're gunslingers. They don't care. It's almost like they have no fear in the world. They're out there and they're having fun, and it's showing. But then you got some vets. You got guys like Mullins who've been around. You got Kyle Gibson, who was on the Phillies team last year that went to the World Series. Do they got the right mix of young guys and veteran leadership to make it through here?
Well, a couple things. First of all, the opposition that awaits them. If you look at the playoff field, Tampa Bay, Toronto, Seattle, Houston, Texas, some of those Texans yet to be determined. But it's going to be that one of those teams is going to be coming to Camden Yards on October the 7th for Game 1. The Orioles have a winning record against 3 of them and have split with Houston and with the Texas Rangers. They don't have a losing record against any of them.
Impressive.
They've played well against all of those teams. They can beat all of those teams. And to your point about these young guys who've never been through it before, they don't know what they don't know.
That's a great line.
And they don't. They just know they're pretty good at baseball, and they don't care who you are or how good you are because they believe in who they are. And I actually asked Adam Jones about that as he was a part of that last run of 3 playoff teams. What would you say to these guys? He goes, I can tell they know what they're doing. Like they don't play with any fear that they're going to be just fine. And another example are those Tampa Bay Rays, who have been a playoff team year after year with guys who their roster changes over with young rookies, and they show up and they never shrink from the big stage.
Yeah.
So if you've got good players, I think that's, talent engenders a level of confidence beyond experience. It just does.
Right.
In baseball, at least, I see it. Maybe it's true in other sports as well. After such a long season, it's like we hear it said in football all the time. After a certain point, you're not a rookie anymore.
Yeah.
And if you've gone through a little bit of this, now I'm not saying that the heat won't be turned up in the postseason, because it will be.
Right.
And the intensity and the importance of every game. They now transition from the marathon to a sprint.
There you go.
And if you've ever run a marathon or a long distance race, it's one thing. But to have to line up and do a 400-meter dash now, it's a different muscle. It's just a whole different training. But that's what it is. And the games mean more, and every step means more, and every one who lines up with you is that much better. You don't play the last place teams anymore. You play the best teams now.
Yep.
But again, the Orioles are the best team in the American League, and the American League East. So they have nothing to fear.
That's right. And I'll tell you what, if you're thinking that this team can't handle it, I'll tell you, you don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what they don't know. I love that line there. Hey, real quick, we are going to wrap things up here. But if you are just joining us, Orioles, division champs for the first time since 2014. This is a huge deal, okay? 100 wins for the first time in 20-plus years. The road from the American League, it runs to the city of Baltimore in Camden Yards. Mark, the last thing I want to talk to you about, because we always say, people who've covered sports in this city for a long time, I think of Rob Long, he's another one. Not that the Ravens aren't important. The Ravens are just as important as the Orioles. But for some reason, when the Orioles are winning in this city, it's always a little different. It's like a different feel. How big is this for Baltimore?
Well, it's because the Ravens have such a great record of success that when you add the success of the Orioles, it's full bloom, is what it is. Because the Ravens are sort of they've already established their expected success. It's expected.
And that's not just in Baltimore. That's like for all of sports.
They're there.
Yeah.
So when the Orioles rise up to become a part of that, you've got a powerhouse in a city that is ready for both to bloom. And you're around town, you hear what people are now saying. One other thing about the 100 wins, it was actually 1980, the last time they won 100 games.
Wow.
So it's been 43 years, the last time the Orioles have won 100 games. And the oddity or irony of that is, that was before wild cards. They finished in second place. They didn't even go to the playoffs.
Oh, geez. Think about that. Let that sink in.
That's why they have a wild card now. It's like, I won 100 games and I got to sit at home while other teams get to play? That's not fair. No longer the case. 100 and number 1 in the American League.
So on the night that they announced their 30-year lease extension with Camden Yards, the Orioles staying in Baltimore, and they get the AL East wrapped up. Here we go. Let the fun times begin.
October the 7th. It's a Saturday. It's the day that there's a night concert at M&T Bank Stadium, Billy Joel and Stevie Nicks. So it's going to be a day game, we assume, unless they want to put those two things head-to-head, which they can't and probably won't.
I don't think so, yeah.
So get ready for some day baseball on October 7th here in Baltimore. It'll be round 2 because the Orioles get a first-round bye. Pretty
Stevie
awesome.
and Billy better have their O's hats on. The city.
Good point.
Going to be rocking. Rick Ritter, Mark Viviano, we appreciate you joining us for this special. Join in to WJZ at 11 o'clock tonight on your TV for all of your celebration highlights and your local news. We'll see you then.